red light.
You're recording, Stuart.
All right. Welcome everybody to the last Infrastructure Services Committee meeting. Welcome to the Chief Executive, Council, staff, the Mayor, fellow councillors, and the public that's viewing that are not here. I'll ask for any apologies. Any extraordinary business? Any declarations of interest? Our last Infrastructure Services Committee meeting on the 8th of October. Any changes anybody wants? On page 3 or 4? If not, somebody like to move those minutes be received. Thank you. Councillor Brown, seconded. Councillor Robinson. All in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Contrary, carried. Next item. Number 5, entrances into new subdivisions. Welcome, Jane. Councillors, you got any questions on the report? Those of you that have read the report should have had a bit of a look around town just to see what the report talks about, because there are more examples than the few that were in the report. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jane, looking at the recommendation, it's a current practice to disallow it. So how do we get them in? Because a lot of the ones you're talking about shouldn't be there then.
That it wasn't always the practice. In the past, we did used to allow them, and then because it became so problematic, we stopped allowing them quite some time ago. Every now and then, a developer will complain about that, and recently a developer did complain to the Chief Executive about it, so he asked if we would put forward a report so that councillors can say whether they're happy with what we're doing or not happy with what we're doing, and then that would be the end of it one way or the other.
I've got a question myself. If a developer erects a structure on his own land and then designates that land as reserved land to the council, do we end up having to maintain that structure even though it's not actually initially on council land?
You would have to, if you accepted that and it became an asset vested in the council, then yes, you would become eligible for its ongoing maintenance.
No further questions. Councillor Lovett.
I'm just going to say, after driving around having a look at a few of these, they are starting to look shabby, and they're all kind of all different widths and right on the seal and whatever. Are they becoming problematic and expensive to maintain these?
Yes, they are, which is why I think my colleagues in infrastructure services don't want to keep taking them on. And as I mentioned in the report, there's often higher expectations about the standard of maintenance, and an example of that would be that bridge in the Bearton subdivision where the complaints that it was starting to look mossy and what have you, whereas if it had been one of our standard sort of bridges, that wouldn't arise. So there are ongoing costs and damage. I just walked along Pages Road and saw that brick wall has been hit again and is broken on 2 sides, so it is an ongoing issue.
Mr Mayor.
Just following on from your question, Mr Chairman, so if it was on the developer's land and stayed on the developer's land, then that would, and the developer would look after it, then that would be okay?
Yes, that would be okay, and if they wanted to gift it to the city at some later point as a reserve, you would still have the option of saying yes, you wanted it, or no, you didn't. You wouldn't have to automatically accept it. Some councils go go further with Selwyn District Council as an example. They don't allow them on the road. If you want them, you've got to put them on private land. They then also require the developer to either set up a body corporate or put caveats on the certificates of title to ensure ongoing maintenance of those, even though they're on private land, to make sure they don't look scruffy in the future, and then people come along saying to the council, what are you going to do about it, even though they're not on council land.
Mr. Riak?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just to reflect on the contention from the developer, because I think the report explains the issues really effectively. The complaint from the developer is that it diminishes the value of the development. You put these entranceways on the two sections, then the value of those two sections that faces the entranceway is diminished, and the incentive will be not to have these entranceways at all, and they add amenity value to the development. They beautify the district to an extent, and that their contention is they should be on the road reserve and maintained to maximise the appeal and value of the subdivision. So that was the counter argument, but it's in the report. It's just worth noting it for councillors' attention, because that was the message I received loud and clear from the developer in this case.
Councillor Rollinson?
Thank you, and I understand what's written here. Just how common is it that a developer would actually retain the piece and maintain that nice entranceway themselves?
No, they wouldn't. They're trying to sell it. So the issue for them is they're trying to sell those front two sections, and the entranceway effectively becomes on private property. And they're saying that the person who buys those sections doesn't have the same desire to pay the market price for the section, because they're now left with the entranceway to maintain. And in fact, you've got two separate landowners, each maintaining one half of the entranceway, and that there'll be different standards of maintenance and different attention. But either way, it reduces the value of those two sections.
Right, thank you. I thought that's what the answer would be.
Councillor Etham?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just wondering, in light of the comments regarding Selwyn District Council, is it worth us pursuing that and making the law a bit more strict or tighter, so that there is no misunderstanding as to what we should or should not be doing? I notice in paragraph 6 there in the report, I think it's worthy of investigation.
No comment,
Thunderous silence.
Well, that's your call at the end of the year. Yep.
Right. Well, I ask councillors that, is it worth asking for some sort of report or making some decision that we tighten up those rules and regulations, just so that there is no ambiguity and everybody understands exactly what the rules are?
Councillor Cameron?
Does anybody want to address that, or shall I've got something totally different to ask?
What actually would be involved? We have to change the district plan to take on Selwyn's legal requirements.
I would have to look into that. I don't know. I'm trying to remember whether Selwyn have it in their district plan or whether they just do it through their subdivision standards, and we are going to be doing more work on a code of subdivision, and it might be that it could form part of that. So I'd have to do some more work on that.
Councillor Cameron?
Jane, you mentioned Turton Green and the bridge. If the developer built the bridge, would they still have to pay for the bridge if they followed council's standard bridge prototype? They'd pay for the bridge, and then council would maintain the bridge if the bridge was gifted to them?
Yes. Yep.
Councillor Braham?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jane, the existing one we've got now, how long has that been going? How many years has that been used?
how many years have we not been
Now,
accepting?
the one you've got now, that's the one, if I read it here, the current one is the one you want to keep going, is that correct?
Current practice?
Yes,
Yep,
yeah.
yep.
So how long has it been the practice?
I would have to ask Neil or Bert Hoffman.
I would say it's 5 to 6 years. Brian, I don't know if you know any more.
Trying, since I've been here, to try and get it in. Also, now that the government has gone to Road to Zero, it sort of brings it a little bit more to the fore as well. So it's an attempt to try and get this out of the normal practice, if you like. That's what we're trying to do.
I would say it's about 5, 6 years. Yep.
If I've got another one, if I can.
Yes.
So that practice has been going for the last 5 years. Is this the first developer who's complaining about it? Or are there more who want to do it?
No, he's certainly not the first. There are others. I couldn't tell you how many off the top of my head, but most of them will have a go. Why wouldn't you?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, it is an unpopular policy with developers. And I've had several in my office in my short time here wishing it was different. And that's and because it's been a practice rather than a council decision, we felt that the right thing to do was to bring it to council to debate the issues and come to a position that then makes it really clear that how we should interpret and how we should respond to the developers who I can guarantee will continue to have issues if the policy is in place. But it'll be clear for us in the office that that's the council's policy. As it's been through council, there's nowhere else for the developer to turn in terms of their discomfort with the policy.
Councillor Mackay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the recommendation, it says, quote, disallowing structures, comma, signage and other features. My question, sir, is what are other features, or the definition of?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, one example that I put in the report was the trellis in Timald subdivision and non-standard street lighting, which became problematic when we switched to LED.
Thank you. I thought they all would have been structures because they're made of non-natural material, but I've been educated, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Councillor Latham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am in favour of the recommendation, but I wonder, I would like to get an agreement that we ask staff to bring forward a report as what needs to be done to tighten that regulation up, perhaps along the lines of Selwyn. I don't know whether I need to move a motion to that effect, do I? Or if so, I will, that we ask staff to tell us what needs to be done to tighten up that regulation so there's no misunderstanding and no ambiguity.
You moving that motion?
Well, if I need to move a motion, yes, I will, that we ask staff to bring a report about tightening up the regulation about structures on council land at subdivisions.
Before I accept it, I want to ask Jane, how much is involved? Do you have to get a resource consent to put up what we're talking about on the entrance on private land? Is that part of a resource consent, or can they just do it?
It would be part of the resource consent for the subdivision, and we put conditions on that, and one of our standard conditions is that you don't put anything on our land. So it's a condition of the subdivision consent.
Mr. Rea?
Mr. Chairman, in terms of process, could I suggest to your committee that if the recommendation had an additional second part to it to reflect Councillor Latham's perspective on seeking a further report as to how what might be involved in further strengthening the regulations, and that might be a way to deal with it. What we'd really like to have from this meeting, or recommendation from this meeting to council, is the clarity on the matter we're recommending. But there could be, if the second part was a further report on further strengthening it, that would seem to achieve the ends for both.
that be agreeable, councillor Latham?
I'm happy with that,
Yeah.
Mr Chairman.
Well, at this stage, we've had a fair discussion. Would somebody like to move one way or the other of the
Roger's
recommendation?
moved.
You, councillor Latham. Thank you, councillor. Seconded by councillor Lovett.
I would second that. It gives staff certainty now for in the future, and then I quite agree with the second part of it for the subdivision overview of structures and trees and everything else, and I think that probably needs to be brought forward to work on it to see where we're going. But yeah.
Right, we're discussing the recommendation. Any further comments? If not, all in favour of that recommendation, please say aye. Aye. Contrary, carried. Councillor Latham, did you want to move a motion that we extend the another recommendation?
I understood that we had agreed that that motion was going to be extended to that extent.
Okay.
Is that right?
Hello.
As long as we all understand what's happening. Yeah.
Okay, you're happy, Jane? Thank you.
Thank you, Jane.
Item number 6. Welcome, Craig. Any questions, councillors? Fairly straightforward. Permit attendance at meetings by audio or video links. Any questions? Councillor Lovett.
Just going to ask, is that extended to all meetings in future, or will they meet face to face at some point?
I think what the recommendation is the option to attend by video if you can't attend in person, but the meetings will always be organised to attend in person unless there are other circumstances, if you know what I mean. It's trying to cover all bases.
No questions? Somebody like to move the motion, please? Moved councillor Brahm, seconded councillor Lovett. Any further discussion? Councillor McMillan.
If I can chip in, I think it's a great idea. I'm on this committee, and even though we only meet sort of a few times a year, there's a lot of councils who live a 2-hour drive away. So it will be beneficial to everyone, I think.
Mr Mayor.
The staff generally attend these meetings as well, so this will apply to the staff that they can go in by video link.
That is correct.
Because it'll save them having to travel great distances as well.
Yep. Councillor Rawlinson.
No, I support it too, and I think any means of having the full complement of people in that meeting that need to be in the meeting should be used. And we got so used to using Zoom, I think it's part of the way of life now.
No further discussion. I'll put the motion. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Contrary, carried. Item number 7, closure of Stock Race, Chertsey Road. I think Mr McCann has to handle this.
Councillors, this is the first test case of our new standard operating procedure for water race alterations, including closures, which we adopted in October last year. So following those, the criteria that it's in those guidelines, these two reports coming through to you are deemed to be moderate or high, which requires the committee to consider them. So that's the background, and that's why they've come through to you, and it's basically following those guidelines for you to consider.
Mr Mayor?
Just a question on the map, which is Appendix 1. There's a red line there and there's a yellow line there. What's the meaning of each?
So the red line is the proposed closure.
Yep.
The yellow dotted line is the property boundaries.
So there's 3 properties involved here?
That's correct. Or was it 4 on this first
Oh,
one?
there's one right at the very top.
Yeah, there's 4 on this
A
first
little
one.
wee piece at the top.
Triangle on the top.
Oh, yep. And which is the applicant? It's with the bigger block of land.
Yes, that's correct.
Yep. which is the council's block of land?
The little strip in the middle.
Neighbour 2?
Neighbour 2, that's correct.
Neighbour 2, yep. The town water system goes there, to that little strip in the middle?
I don't believe so.
Sure.
Chris, would you know?
I'm not sure, sorry.
Yeah. I don't think so.
And why doesn't the applicant, why don't they want it? What's their reasoning?
I think applicant 1 wants it for amenity values.
Who applied to have it turned off?
The applicant?
Yep.
Yeah.
So they want it off?
He doesn't want it, doesn't use it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and wants it closed.
Because he doesn't use it, that's why he wants it off?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think the applicant did make a submission to our stock water consultation process, yeah.
I've also got a question. If you look at the map, there's a blue line. That's also a stock water race. So neighbour 3 would actually have 2 stock water races. He's already got a blue one there.
That's correct. That is another stock water race that ends just that is the last property of that stock water race. Not as reliable as the other race, and we do have problems getting water down to the bottom of that race. And if we were to close the stock water race, it would involve putting way more water into the alternative race to try and get that further down to the end, as it's mentioned in the report.
Councillor Latham?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When the applicant applied to have this race closed, did he not, or she not, approach the others on that race and get, or did he just go ahead and, do we know? Or because I note that 75% of the users are opposed to the closure of the race. So I'm just wondering, was the applicant aware that perhaps he might have been better to talk to the neighbours first, or?
I'm not sure if they personally have, but our stock water ranger has made contact with all the neighbours, yeah, and got feedback from them.
I think it's unfortunate that we're moving to closing or stock water races to make them more efficient, perhaps working with irrigation companies. And this is going to be one of those cases where it's 2 horses and 5 sheep or something that is going to accentuate problems that we're going to have in the future. I wonder, has Bar Hill Chertsey got water somewhere? Is that the road? Does anybody know? They've got water somewhere below Chertsey. Do they go down that road or not? They don't.
Just shy of it.
Mr. Mayor, you got it.
Yeah, this is, if the recommendation passes, it's going to go to council. So could we have some information as to whether that neighbour 2 is could get water off the Chertsey Town water system, or any of those, all of those properties are linked to the Chertsey Town water system? Or could be, yep.
We can certainly get that information.
Thanks.
Yep.
Councillor Mackay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the 5th dot point in the summary, officers note that 5 of the 14 criteria, alignment with the council and the regional council strategy and plans. So what's the regional council strategy and plans involved with this water race?
That would be referring to, that's Richard Maben referring to our surface water strategy, I think, and the document that we're following. I'd have to know exactly what he's referring to in the document.
So what does that say in that document you're referring to? In 2 sentences.
I would have to look and I'll have to get that from him.
Because that's what I think. No, I can't. No. The other question I have is in the background, current situation, point 15, no known effects on ecological So why is there no known effects on firefighting values? The fire brigade hasn't got a bag big enough to fit in the race full of dirt. Is that the reason?
I don't know. I don't know. I'd have to look into that. Don't know the detail on that.
Presumably, though, there's access to other water, and they wouldn't
must
be
be.
relying on the water race.
Supplementary, man. I'll wait.
Councillor Rawlinson?
Thank you. Just a question, we're going to be faced with a lot of these, I would think, in the near future or going forward, but the neighbour who's on the top end of any line like that, what would be the options of piping it through their place to the people below who do rely on that water?
That is always an option that we can consider, certainly, subject to them approving and it being feasible. And if the people who would be gaining that service would be prepared to pay for it, that's often the issue that prevents us from doing so.
Thank you.
Yeah. Councillor Mackay?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Back to number 15 again. If there are no known effects for firefighting, does that, after the Chief Executive's answer, does that mean that there's a big quantity of water handy for firefighting? I may have supplementary depending on the answer.
I think we can just assume there is water available in more higher quantity than what's in this particular race,
Okay, so
being an end of a race.
if that high quantity of water is available close by, which it obviously is, from the answers I have received, why can't a pipe be run to the effective neighbours and given a trough?
That's certainly possible. It's just the cost of doing so and whether the neighbour would be prepared to pay for that. Yeah.
Councillor Lovett?
The water race up the very top by neighbour 1, is that dry sometimes, or is that a continue flow up there?
It would occasionally be dry, but it's far more reliable than the other one, the light blue one shown.
Okay, no, I actually support like getting a mole plough and the alkathene pipe going down, and if it's only for stock, I mean, and that is it's not an expensive process to keep them all happy and closing it.
Yeah, our process would be, as I said, is for the people who would be benefiting to pay for that. And
yes.
we'd raise that with them and see if they're prepared to.
It's not an expensive job.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, I just pulled up the Chertsey water map, and it does go past the property of number 2. The town water supply does go through there. The size of that property is 0.6 of a hectare. I'm wondering, why does council even own that piece of land? Who do we lease it to someone, or?
Obviously.
Yes, we do. Yeah.
Could it be looked at whether it's strategic, we need to even keep it? If we count it for a strategic purpose or not?
I had a look on Google Earth, there's a couple of horses there, so. Well, it looks like we're unsure what we want to do. Do we want to get more information, especially if town water is available? Would you like to move something like that, Mr. Mayor, that perhaps we...
I've got a question, yeah.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Councillor Brown.
Before we go there, Mr. Chair, the recommendation is there because that is the rules we set last year in October. This is the first time we start debating it and we start changing it already. It is a yes or no. You know, we made the rules last year. This is the first time we test it. It works properly, but the applicant is not going to win. There's some people who don't want to have it closed. Are we going to go against our own rulings, or what are we doing here?
I think as councillors we've found mitigating circumstances that perhaps weren't considered in the original criteria. Councillor Brown?
That might be true, and it is basically farmers who want to have it closed. Other ones might not. So that is your personal feelings.
Councillor Latham?
Are we ready to move the recommendation, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, I think we've had a fair discussion on it.
I would move then that the council decline the application to close the Stockwater race, starting at junction on PN 2332 Wards Road and passing through 3 properties before ending in a soak hole on PN 2431 Chertsey Road. And I do that taking into account the comments that have been made about piping water and perhaps making other arrangements. But the water here is used for stock, and it's a stock water supply. And I think if we start to mix and match everybody when they come along to close a race or keep it open or whatnot, we're going to end up with a real hodgepodge of things. And so, although I'd love to see stock water races closed, I would support this. And I think it's the safest and most common sense way to proceed.
Seconded, Councillor Brown.
I will, for the same reasons.
Any further comments? Put the motion, all in favour, please say. Sorry, Councillor, Mr Mayor.
Yeah, I don't support the recommendation, and I'd like to see it at council where we can have a little bit more information on it there. This will go to council, I'm sure, and have another debate at council with some more information. So I won't be supporting.
Councillor Lovett.
And I completely support Neil Brown. On this too, can we have some more proposals, and if we can win, have a win-win, that'll be good.
No further comment. Right, all in favour, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Contrary? Show of hands. That's all in favour. That's 1, 2, 3. Those against? 1, 2, 3. Chairman has a casting vote. I will vote against the motion. We will bring it up at council and we'll ask for more information, especially regarding the availability of other types of water. Is that permissible?
That's fine. Yeah.
My last chair as a infrastructure committee, I might as well use the chairman's prerogative. Next item on the agenda, another closure of Stockwater race, Bearton Township.
Yes, through the chair. Yeah, this again is deemed a moderate significance because it's more than 10 property owners, and this is a pretty straightforward one where there's strong support to close the network.
Any comments or questions? Councillor Ronson.
I don't disagree with the closure. It's just a comment. When I was looking at these maps, a key to a map would be really helpful in this situation.
Yeah, we'll make sure that's done in future.
Couldn't
So you
work
can understand.
out whether it was the blue lines or the dotted. And when I went to the wee bit of piping, I figured it had to be the dotted line, but I thought just a key would be very helpful.
The red dotted line is the proposed closure. That's correct. We'll make sure we do that in future.
And when you've got total agreement, I have no issue closing a race, but yeah.
Mr Mayor.
As looking at the blue lines that are left, is council officers going to initiate closing them as well? This is in the middle of a township which has other water sources available. Are those other blue lines, other Stockwater races needed there?
That will be identified going forward. Now that we have a resource looking at exactly that in the strategic closures going forward.
Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This recommendation I can certainly follow, and I will support it because this is what we discussed in October last year. This will fit in that criteria.
Are you moving the motion?
If there's no more questions, I will.
No further questions? Oh, Councillor Lovett, have you got a question or?
I was going to second it.
You got a question? Councillor Ronson, you got a
That's
question?
right, I was going to second it.
Second it. Right, moved and Councillor Brown, seconded Councillor Ronson. Any further discussion? If not, all in favour, please say aye. Aye. Carried. Item Number 9, Ashburton Car Club Road closure. Welcome, Brian. Any questions? Or you got anything to add, Mr. Forth?
Nothing to add, Mr. Chairman.
No questions? Somebody like to move? You moving it, Councillor Brown?
Oh, well, it's something that's been done for years and it's a good thing.
Seconded, Councillor Lovett.
Yes, I'll second that, thanks.
Any discussion? If not, all in favour, please say aye. Aye. Contrary, carried. Item number 10. Mr. McCann.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This report that you see in front of you is our compliance report, our annual compliance report with regards to our drinking water. And it's important to note that, you know, as requirements and specifications are raised with regard to treatment of water and what's secure and how we manage water better going forward, it's important to note that the quality of our water hasn't changed. It's just that the regulations are getting tighter, and I thought this would be a great opportunity for Ewan and Chris to just give an overview on the compliance and what we test for in water and how we comply with all the various requirements as part of providing drinking water. So I'll hand over to Ewan.
Yes, thank you, Neil. Good morning, councillors. So this is basically going to support the report you have in front of you from Andrew Guthrie, and it's going to be a bit of a crash course in what the drinking water standards are and how we try or intend to comply with them. So, for background, so the current version of the drinking water standards were issued in December 2018. We, as a water supplier, have to comply with the standards in order to supply safe drinking water. We have to comply with the drinking water standards. There are 5 key compliance criteria, and they're listed there. They're bacterial, protozoa, chemical, cyanotoxin, and radiological. We monitor these throughout the year in various different functions, which I'll go through, and we are audited annually on our compliance status in regard to each criteria. So that audit process is run by the Ministry of Health and the Drinking Water Assessors, and the report that is being presented to you today from Hayley Prophet, our Drinking Water Assessor, is the output of the audit from 2019-2020. So now start going through the criteria one by one. So the bacteria compliance is the first one I'm going to discuss. So the purpose of this in the standards is to ensure that drinking water is free from pathogenic bacteria, so any nasty bugs basically. So Campylobacter, Salmonella, are a couple of examples. The demonstration for compliance for this is through E. coli monitoring. There are a couple of other methods, but the most common method is E. coli monitoring, and that's what we use here at Council. Effectively, E. coli is a form of bacteria that if it's present in your water, you have fecal contamination and you have a problem. We sample for E. coli across all our water supplies, multiple locations at quite a lot of frequencies. In 2019-2020, we collected over 2,000 E. coli samples across all our supplies. If any E. coli is detected in any sample, the supply is non-compliant for bacterial standards. Now, for the annual report period, and the annual report we're discussing, all our water supplies were compliant with bacterial standards. I will put a disclaimer on that though, and I did forget to mention this up front. The annual report only covers 9 of our drinking water supplies. We have 12 as a council. 3 of them were excluded due to size or classification. So the Drumore neighbourhood scheme has less than 100 people connected, so it was excluded from the annual survey from the drinking water assessor. And our 2 rural stockwater combined schemes, Methven Springfield and Montalto, were also excluded because they are classified as RADWIS schemes, which is rural agricultural drinking water supplies. So those supplies are also excluded from the annual survey. So when I refer to the annual survey, I am only talking about the 9 other schemes that we have. But as I said, all 9 were fully compliant with bacteria compliance. Second form of compliance is protozoa. So protozoa are other sort of microorganism bugs that can be nasties. They're just a bit different to bacteria. So Cryptosporidium and Giardia are the examples here. So again, the criteria intends that drinking water should be free of such pathogenic protozoa. The compliance demonstration for protozoa is a lot more complicated than bacteria, simply because monitoring, like we do E. coli for bacteria compliance, is not viable because it's incredibly complicated. E. coli samples cost about $6 a sample to analyse. Protozoa samples cost 600 and require 20 litres of water per sample. So it's just not practical or viable to use monitoring. So the standards have two other ways that you can demonstrate protozoa compliance, and we attempt to use both of them on various supplies. The first method, and is commonly used in Canterbury, is what's called secure groundwater. So this is deep groundwater sourced supplies that are free from surface influence. So the water they draw is not connected in any way to stormwater, rain events, river water, whatever may be happening on the surface. Those waters are deemed compliant with protozoa by default, because water of such a depth and age will not have protozoa in it. So we have 6 supplies covered by the annual report that intend to use secure groundwater to demonstrate protozoa compliance. They're listed there: Ashburton, Rakaia, Hinds, Chertsey, Mayfield and Bearton. 2 of those comply because they still have full groundwater security. They're Rakaia and Bearton. And the other 4, Ashburton, Hinds, Chertsey and Mayfield, currently do not comply with all the secure groundwater criteria, so they do not comply with protozoa compliance. The reason those 4 do not comply is due to concerns around wellhead security. So that's around the borehead engineering. So that's where some of the capital work has been done recently in Ashburton to try and fix that problem and get our security back. Once we get security back, we'll get protozoa compliance back. The other method for protozoa compliance is when you have a different sort of water source. The standards assume if your source is not secure groundwater, there must be some protozoa risk. You must install treatment to treat that risk, and then you demonstrate compliance by proving that treatment worked 100% of the time. This is incredibly difficult to do, and many other councils have issues demonstrating compliance with their treatment process monitoring. So the 3 suppliers in the annual report that use this method are Methven, Mount Somers and Hackatree. And again, all 3 of those failed because they failed to demonstrate their treatment processes were fully effective. Doesn't mean the treatment wasn't working most of the time, we just couldn't guarantee it was working all of the time, and so we failed the protozoa compliance. This can get as small as a 4-minute period. So the treatment plants at Methven and Mount Somers have filters and UV units. We have to monitor flow through the plant, filter pressure, turbidity, UV parameters, and we have to measure them on 1-minute timescales. Any loss of data means we're non-compliant. Any limit breached for more than 3 minutes means we're non-compliant. And even if that only happens once during the year, you are non-compliant for the entire year. So protozoa compliance is definitely the main area of concern for us, and as I mentioned, there are plenty of other water suppliers in a similar situation. Moving on to the third type of compliance, chemical compliance. So the purpose of this section is to avoid chemicals of health significance being present in drinking water at levels that present a significant health risk. This criteria is slightly different to the previous 2 in that there's always going to be some sort of chemicals in your water. It's more about the level of what they are and what levels are safe or not safe. So the key aspect of the annual survey and compliance report for chemical compliance is about what's called priority 2 determinants. So we routinely monitor our water supplies for a large variety of chemicals. We usually do that about once a year. And if any chemicals are identified in that process to be at a level that is half the maximum allowed in the standards, they have to be routinely monitored. That's what's called a priority 2 chemical determinant, and they're the main thing that have to be monitored throughout the year. Other chemicals, if they're well below half the maximum allowed value, do not have to be monitored as regularly, and they are called priority 3 determinants. So listed up there are the 4 suppliers in the annual report that have a P2 assigned. They are Methven, which has fluoride assigned to the plant because we add fluoride at that supply. And then the other 3 are the Tynwald treatment plant for Ashburton, and then the Bearton and Hinds supplies, which all have a P2 assigned for nitrate because nitrate levels on those supplies are above half the MAV. So there's a requirement for monitoring, and that requirement is listed there: weekly at Methven, monthly at the nitrate supplies. All the results for the 2019-2020 year were compliant. They were under the MAV, but they all were above half the MAV. And so the Ashburton, Bearton and Hine supplies were also fully compliant because they were sampled correctly. Unfortunately, we had a little bit of a hiccup with the Methven sampling in 2019-2020. We missed one sample. So it's a weekly sampling requirement, 52 samples a year. We accidentally missed one and only collected 51. So unfortunately, we're technically non-compliant for lack of monitoring. None of the other results were a problem. They were all within required levels, and we're confident the fluoride was never at a dangerous level or at the wrong level at Methven, but we just missed one sample. So we were non-compliant there. All the other supplies in the annual report do not have any P2s assigned, so are compliant with chemical criteria by default. Those three criteria I've gone through so far are definitely the most complicated and the most onerous. The last two here are a lot simpler. So starting with cyanotoxin compliance, this one's quite simple for us because it actually is not an issue. So the purpose of this compliance criteria is to avoid cyanotoxins that can arise from cyanobacteria, often called blue-green algae, being present in drinking water at levels that present a significant health risk. So this applies to typically river-sourced supplies where they can have algal blooms. If your source is deemed a risk of algal blooms, you need to have a management plan in place to manage it. Thankfully for us here at ADC, none of our sources are deemed a risk of algal bloom, so we comply by default. So you'll note in the annual report from the drinking water assessor, the column for cyanotoxin just says not applicable. So we comply by default.
We've got one question, Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you just go one slide back, please?
Slide back.
Might have missed something. What is TP or DZ?
Sorry, DZ distribution zone or the reticulation, TP treatment plant.
Yep.
So they, P2 chemical compliance or P2 determinants can be assigned either to the plant or to the zone, and it depends on the characteristics of the chemical in question and where it might be expected to be more prevalent.
I've got another question, Mr. Mayor.
Two questions. One's on the chemical compliance. You don't measure chlorine yet. We put chlorine in. Why don't you measure how much chlorine is in?
We do measure chlorine, but we do not measure it and report on it for compliance because we do not use chlorine as a compliance measure. But we do measure it. Most of our treatment plants now have automatic chlorine analyzers that are constantly monitoring the chlorine levels, and we also do. Every time we take an E. coli sample in a reticulation, we also do manual chlorine checks. So we take over 2,000 E. coli samples a year. That means we take over 2,000 chlorine field check samples a year as well.
But you don't report it to anyone?
It's not reported to the Ministry of Health because we do not claim compliance via our chlorine dosing. That's one of the methods you can use for bacteria compliance. You can say our chlorine was at this level for this amount of time, and that's another way to prove bacteria compliance, but it's not a method we currently use. We just use E. coli monitoring.
And on the cyanotoxin one, who determines that you don't have to?
So it's a risk-based, history-based approach. So basically, given the type of sources you have, are any of them are likely at risk? Now, the majority of our sources are groundwater, deep groundwater, so they're definitely exempt. And even our shallow groundwater sources are very unlikely to have or be affected by algal blooms in the vicinity. We do have one surface water supply that is actually taken from a river. That's the Montalto Rural Scheme, and that's in the Upper Hines catchment. So it's well above a lot of activity, and it's been assessed and it's deemed not a significant risk. That said, it is something we'll keep an eye on for that particular scheme.
Who assessed that risk?
So we've assessed it as a water supplier, and our drinking water assessor has also viewed that catchment and is aware of that catchment's characteristics and has agreed that it's a low risk.
Councillor Rawlinson, you got a question?
I do, thank you. About chlorine, With it, you say it's automatically goes in. Does it have a self-adjusting rate?
Yeah, so the new analyzers we've been installing in recent years does that as well. Not only do they provide a reading, they also set the target and dose to meet that target. So they provide a much higher level of control of the chlorine dosing that we do at those plants. So most of our treatment plants are now have those dosing analyzers. There's still a few to go. There's still about 3 or 4 plants still to go to get those analyzers. But our intention is to roll them out at all plants. So not only do we have automatic notification if the chlorine's not where it should be, but the instrument's actually doing the control for us. So it should stay where it is meant to.
So often you turn the tap on, let it run a minute, and you can really smell the chlorine. And Tim, you can at the moment, but there's other times where you don't. That's why I was asking.
That'll be down to how the water moves about the reticulation. So if the water's sat in your particular pipe in your particular street for a long amount of time, it might build up some of that odour. So it's all about turnover and perhaps how fresh the water is when it finally arrives at your customer tap.
Thank you.
So the last compliance criteria to go is the radiological compliance. So this is about avoiding radiological determinants being present in the drinking water. This compliance criteria only applies to deep groundwater because they're really the only sources that could be at risk of picking up radiological determinants from deep underground. So, and the requirement for this is relatively simple as well. We are required to sample all deep groundwater bores before they are connected to a supply, and then once every 10 years to check for radiological determinants. Provided that sampling shows you have no issue, the levels are low, that's all you have to do. All our radiological samples have been done in the last 10 years. Most of our deep bores were last done in October 2017, and they were well below maximum allowed values for radiological, so all those supplies are compliant, and then all our non-deep groundwater supplies are compliant by default. And that was all I had. It was very much meant to be a short crash course. So if there are any more questions...
Yes, we've got Councillor Lovett.
Thank you for that. It's actually really highlighted. Just informed us, that was great. Now going to nitrogen levels, how are we tracking with that? Do you keep records year on year where our levels are in the water? Are we tracking up or down, or on other chemicals as well?
Yeah, so nitrate is, as I mentioned, it's a P2 for some of our supplies. When that was discovered and that was assigned, we actually decided to start sampling nitrates everywhere. So we're sampling nitrates on all our supplies, and we've been doing so for about 7 years. So we've actually got quite a lot of trending data. And the trend is upwards, but only very slight. So most of our supplies that do have relatively high nitrates are still trending upwards, but not at a great rate of knots, so to speak. They're trending upwards, but at a very slow rate, so we don't anticipate any major issues from it in the next 20 to 30 years on current data.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, just on the radiological compliance, just give an example of what that would be, in layman's terms.
So, I don't know, Chris, you might be in a better...
So often these are, the rocks deep underground will sort of have some naturally radioactive elements within them, and they'll break down, and some of those decay products will end up just getting into water. So you get very, very, very low levels of radiation. I'm from the UK, and it's very common there for the rocks to break down and release radon gas, and that builds up in basements, so you tend to have to keep them flushed out. And it's kind of a similar process in the groundwater as well. It just picks up natural radiation because, in theory, that water could be down there for 100 years. Before it gets sort of pumped out and used. So that's where it comes from. The levels are extremely low. I mean, I don't know how they compare to chest x-rays, which is the standard way of doing it, but it's very, very low, and it's definitely safe.
I don't think this is an area that any real water supplies have an issue with in New Zealand. I mean, I'm not 100% sure of that, but I don't think radiological or radioactive substances are that common in any of our water sources.
No further questions? Thank you for your report. Somebody like to move the motion that we receive the report? No move. Councillor Lovett moved, Councillor Brahm seconded.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? All lot in favour, please say aye. Contrary? Carried. That's the final report we have this morning. Our final infrastructure committee meeting. Thank you, members of the committee. Fairly short term for 1 year. Personally, I'm a little disappointed to see the committee structure disappear, because we do question the staff perhaps a bit more. It'll be up to ourselves at full council meetings to make sure that we understand, we learn what's going on, rather than with committees sometimes you delve a little bit deeper than you do at full council. Anyway, that decision will be made this afternoon, and I'll declare the infrastructure meeting closed.